I'll wear what's called the Filipiniana, and it's a very traditional Filipino formal wear.
The WTA's official camera did not follow Aryna Sabalenka down the red carpet at the Laureus World Sports Awards on April 20th. Sabalenka had just been named Sportswoman of the Year. The camera followed Alex Eala.
I felt like a princess.
Eala was ranked number 44. She had lost her last match 1-6, 4-6. She was not nominated for any award that evening. And yet the organization that tracks every point she earns, every ranking she climbs, every match she plays, deployed its camera for her entrance at what the sporting world calls the Oscars of sports. That discrepancy does not resolve itself in the scoreline. What Leylah Fernandez said after Stuttgart, and what Eala did inside the Palacio de Cibeles.
There weren't many stylists available.
Wearing a gown stitched by her uncle's hands.
My uncle, a known fashion designer in the Philippines, so we called him up and we told him, I was like, I want this.
Lands differently once you understand exactly how those 5 days connected. 2 years ago, Alex Eala was ranked outside the top 100 and had never won a WTA main draw match. By March 16, 2026, she had reached a career high of number 29, at that point the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA history. The climb was real, so was what followed it. Between that career peak and the week that begins this story, she dropped 15 ranking positions and absorbed 2 losses that raised serious questions about whether the surface beneath her feet, clay, would be the thing that defined the ceiling of her career. That context matters because the events of April 20th and April 22nd cannot be understood apart from the weight she was carrying into them. Start with the honest picture. Alex Eala's clay court record entering Madrid was a problem. Not a narrative problem, not a framing problem, but a documented, recurring, statistically uncomfortable problem. She had suffered early exits in her first 2 clay events of 2026, a round of 16 departure in Linz, followed by a first-round loss in Stuttgart. The Stuttgart result was particularly blunt. World number 25, Leylah Fernandez, a player who had watched Eala at the Rafael Nadal Academy years earlier and studied her from a distance, executed a match plan that exposed every fragility on the surface. First set, 6-1. Eala held just 1 game. The second set extended further, but the conclusion was the same, 6-4 exit. To understand what that loss cost beyond points and prize money, you need to understand the broader clay arithmetic. Eala's record against Czech players stood at 0-13, a verified, Rappler-documented pattern that underlines a specific vulnerability against a player profile common at every major clay event. Rome and Roland Garros, where the draw would be deeper and the conditions slower, were not yet 3 weeks away. There is a sympathetic reading of Fernandez's position worth acknowledging here. She is world number 25, a 2021 U.S. Open finalist, and a player who prepares with exceptional tactical specificity. She had her coach's scouting report committed to memory by the time the match reached its decisive moment. Her win in Stuttgart was not a surprise. What she said about Eala afterward, however, was, in her post-match interview, as broadcast by Sky Sports, Fernandez was asked about the difficulty of the match.
My coach told me I'd love 30, 5-4. He said
She described what her coach told her at 0-30, 5-4, when the second set was almost closed.
no, she's not gonna go down easy. As you can see, she's gonna fight. You're gonna have to take the match.
He said, she's not going to go down easy, as you can see. She's going to fight. You're going to have to take the match. That is not what coaches say about players they expect to close out routinely, but what came next was more revealing. Fernandez reached back, unprompted, to a memory from years earlier at the Rafa Nadal Academy. She recalled watching Eala there, turning to her own coach and saying, wow, she plays quick. In her post-match statement reported by Tennis 365, Fernandez said, I remember telling my coach at the time saying like, wow, she plays quick, so it was like a mirror because he said, look, it's exactly like you. She compared Eala to herself, not as a compliment extended after a comfortable win, but as the explanation for why the match required a coach's intervention during match point. The woman who beat Eala 6-1, 6-4 spent her post-match interview describing the player she beat as her own reflection. On April 20th, 5 days after Stuttgart, Eala arrived at the Palacio de Cibeles in Madrid for the 2026 Laureus World Sports Awards. The Palacio de Cibeles is not a tennis venue. It is a neoclassical city hall turned cultural space at the center of one of Europe's most observed sports capitals. The WTA's official Instagram status 74,000 likes on a single post, outperforming the organization's own coverage of the event's award winners, deployed its camera for Eala's arrival. The caption was 5 words: "From court to carpet, no ranking, no credential, no bracket context, just her name and a nation's flag." The WTA chose to mark her entrance as the tennis story of the evening, despite the organization having 2 of its most decorated champions, Sabalenka and Rybakina, in the same room. What institutions choose to document reveals more than what they write in the accompanying text. Here is the specific detail that cannot be mapped to rankings or broadcast deals or audience metrics. The gown Eala wore that evening was not sourced from a sponsoring brand. It was not a loan from a European house. It was designed by her uncle, Rhett Eala, a renowned Filipino fashion designer, and built specifically for this occasion. A full beige chiffon dress with pleated bodice details paired with a piña bolero. The piña fiber, woven from pineapple leaf, is among the most distinctly Filipino materials in formal wear. Her uncle stitched the Philippines into the fabric. She wore it into a room full of the most documented athletes on the planet. This is not a styling choice. It is a declaration of where she comes from, made at precisely the moment when her clay court results were giving her every reason to arrive quietly. The ceremony was co-hosted by Novak Djokovic, 22 Grand Slam titles, and Eileen Gu, 3 Olympic gold medals. It was the first time in Laureus history that 2 active athletes had co-hosted the event. Eala shared a selfie with both of them from the Palacio de Cibeles. Her caption on her Instagram story, "Sandwiched between greatness," and the caption was a joke. It was also a fact, and the people who have been watching her since before the rankings confirmed what they already knew. They recognized the precision of that moment. The WTA's most tracked entrance at a ceremony honoring the world's greatest athletes was not a seeded player or a title holder. It was a 20-year-old from the Philippines who had lost her last match by a first-set score of 1-6, wearing her family's fabric, using exactly 2 words to describe the company she was keeping. 24 hours after the Laureus ceremony, Eala walked onto the Arantxa Sanchez Stadium clay at the Mutua Madrid Open. Her opponent was Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, a qualifier ranked 116th, but also a former Madrid semifinalist and a 34-year-old professional who has competed on this court at the highest level for 15 years. The scoreline was 6-3, 6-3. Eala needed 1 hour and 31 minutes. She landed 68% of her first serves and won 76% of those points. Pavlyuchenkova, by comparison, won just 50% of her first serve points. On a surface that had produced a 1-6 loss less than a week earlier, Eala controlled the match's structure from the 5th game of the first set onward, and she never relinquished that control. The people who had been tracking this story, the ones who saw Stuttgart as a setback in a season, not a verdict on a career, did not need to be told that the Madrid win meant something different from the scoreline. They had already built that conclusion from the evidence. The result confirmed what they could see from the outside, which is exactly how it works when someone is genuinely on the right track rather than simply being handed a favorable narrative. Before Stuttgart, before the Laureus ceremony, before any of this week's events arranged themselves into their current shape. Greg Rusedski was already saying it. Rusedski is not a commentator filing takes for traffic. He is a former world number 4, a 1997 U.S. Open finalist, and a man who has watched 2 generations of clay court tennis from a position of professional intimacy. When he speaks about serve mechanics and surface-specific preparation, he speaks from documented expertise rather than broadcast enthusiasm. He recorded his assessment on his podcast Off Court with Greg Rusedski, and the assessment was both honest and specific. Eala is getting into the later stages of tournaments, but once she gets there, she's getting beaten in pretty one-sided matches. I think she needs to improve the serve. He named the specific technical problem. He did not dress it in false comfort, but the conclusion he reached was not a ceiling. It was a ceiling with a visible way through it. I'd love to see her, on this surface, crack the top 20 in the world. He added, "She's too good a player not to make it into the top 10. A former world number 4 identifying a technical flaw and concluding in the same breath that the player is too good not to reach the top 10. That sequence carries more weight than 100 posts of celebration. It is the difference between promotion and evidence. What happened in Madrid on April 22nd was not only a first-round win over a qualifier, it was the opening result of a clay court stretch that runs directly to the most important surface tournament in tennis. After Madrid, which runs until May 3rd, Eala is entered in the WTA 1000 Rome Open and the WTA 125 Parma Ladies Open, both in Italy. Then Roland Garros, May 24th, Paris. The French Open, which is not simply a Grand Slam, it is the specific tournament that will determine whether her clay development has progressed from compelling progress narrative to legitimate contender on dirt. Her round of 64 opponent in Madrid is 19th seed Elise Mertens. Mertens is Belgian, experienced, and a player who performs with disciplined consistency at WTA 1000 events. That match is not the Pavlyuchenkova match. The bracket will not offer similar comfort as it deepens, but the Pavlyuchenkova win changed the material conditions slightly. Eala now has ranking points and match rhythm from a surface where she arrived carrying a 1-6 first set memory. The commercial dimension of this story is already visible and growing. When Rusetsky called her like Manny Pacquiao in terms of what she means to Filipino sports culture and named the specific behavioral pattern he has observed, that her matches sell out wherever there is a Filipino community, he was describing something that tournament directors at WTA 1000 events are already watching. A player who drives sell-out demand at the ranking of 44 generates a very different kind of institutional attention than her seeding would normally invite. The clay season math is straightforward. 6 weeks, 3 major events, 1 Grand Slam at the end of it. Whether the result in Stuttgart or the result in Madrid represents the more accurate version of Eala's clay capability is a question that will be answered before June. The Miami Open round of 16 result requires honesty. March 23rd. Karolina Muchova, world number 13, defeated Eala 6-0, 6-2 in exactly 1 hour. From a player who had reached her career-high ranking of number 29 just 1 week earlier, this was not a setback. It was a dismantling. Muchova did not adjust mid-match. She controlled every dimension of the contest from the first game to the last, and Eala could not solve any of it. ESPN's headline called it a dismal loss. That word was not unfair. The score was the score. What happened next, in Stuttgart, in the Laureus ceremony, in Madrid, is not rendered more heroic by minimizing what happened in Miami. It is rendered more meaningful by sitting with it honestly. A player who absorbed a 6-0 first set against the world number 13, dropped to 45th in the rankings, walked into a first-round draw in Stuttgart against a player who compared her to herself, lost that match too, and then showed up 5 days later to the Oscars of sports wearing her uncle's hands, stood between Djokovic and Eileen Gu, and posted 2 words about it with complete composure. The composure is the evidence, not the narrative about composure, the fact of it. What she said after the Stuttgart loss in a post-match statement was that she acknowledged Fernandez as a great player and knew she had to keep competing. She did not describe the loss as anything other than what it was. She did not build a scaffold of reframing around it. She said she needed to improve. And then in the next breath of the next week, she did. That bridge between the honest acknowledgement of difficulty and the quiet action that followed is where the title's full meaning lives. April 15th, Stuttgart, a 6-1 first set loss to a player who recalled watching her and thinking she plays quick, and then used that memory as a scouting warning to her own coach. April 20th, Madrid, a gown stitched from piña fiber by her uncle's hands, worn into a ceremony where the WTA's camera chose her entrance over the entrance of the player who had just been named Sportswoman of the Year. April 22nd, The Arancha Sanchez Stadium clay, 6-3, 6-3, 68% first serve percentage, 1 hour and 31 minutes. Of the controlled, disciplined clay tennis that Greg Rusedski said he would love to see her produce. The WTA did not put a camera on a ranked 44 player at the Oscars of Sports because of her bracket position. They put it on her because something was already visible, something the people closest to this story have understood for longer than the mainstream has been paying attention. That something has a specific shape now. It is a beige chiffon gown with a piña bolero, built by her Uncle Rhett's hands in a workroom somewhere that had nothing to do with draw ceremonies or seedings or surface statistics, built because someone in her family understood that this moment, this week, this particular red carpet in Madrid required her to arrive as exactly who she is. She walked past Carlos Alcaraz and Aryna Sabalenka wearing the Philippines at the Oscars of Sports. She posed with the two most decorated hosts in Laureus history and described herself as sandwiched between greatness, not awestruck, not diminished, not performing humility, just accurate about where she was standing. And then she went out the next day and won on clay. She wore her uncle's hands to the Oscars of Sports. Then she went and won in Madrid. That is not a sentence that belongs to the same week for most players. For Alex Eala in April 2026, it is a Tuesday followed by a Wednesday. Elise Mertens is waiting in the round of 64. Mertens has the experience, the consistency, and the clay court pedigree to expose exactly the surface problems Rusedski named. Does what Eala produced against Pavlyuchenkova carry into that match? Or does the bracket reveal the ceiling the clay season has been building toward? The clay season has 6 weeks left. Roland Garros is at the end of it. If you want to know what happens when that gown, that score line, and that surface question arrive at their conclusion, stake your claim in the comments right now. Does Eala reach the round of 16 at Roland Garros, or does clay stop her before Paris delivers its answer? Subscribe so you are already here when that answer arrives, because this story is moving faster than the calendar expected, and the next chapter is on Wednesday.